Hello everyone and welcome to ZankCast, where we interview members of the Bay community. This time we have a legendary guest, the founder of the World Beyblade Organization, or Fighting Spirit Inc. We have BeyBrad here today.
Hello, this is BeyBrad. Thanks for having me on, Zankye.
Thanks so much for being here. Alrighty, so obviously the first icebreaker question is just introduction to yourself for people who are wondering a little bit about you.
Sure. So, my name is Brad. I assume most of you might know me under the name BeyBrad. As Zankye said, I am the founder of the World Beyblade Organization. Spent many years involved in Beyblade, and I'm still there as a member of the board of the nonprofit Fighting Spirits Inc. That supports the WBO. So yeah, looking forward to talking about Beyblade and the history of the World Beyblade Organization.
Awesome. So what got you into Beyblade originally?
So like a lot of people, I was introduced to Beyblade from the anime, but the very first episode of the very first season, which aired on YTV here in Canada, and I remember someone coming up to me in high school and saying, "Did you see that there's going to be this new anime about spinning tops on YTV, and it's called Beyblade?" And I remember thinking, that sounds boring. That sounds like it couldn't possibly be fun or interesting. And then, of course, I watched it, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I love it. And I ended up buying fake Beyblades at a corner store. And at the time, this is about like 20 years ago now, fake Beyblades were much easier to find than real Beyblades. Beyblade had kind of just started taking off. It was sold out in a lot of retailers like Walmart, but pretty much every corner store in Ontario, at least, had fake Beyblades. The most common being ones from a brand called TT Hongli, which I think is pretty infamous in the Beyblade community for being quite prolific counterfeiters. But I remember hearing that at the anime convention, Anime North, YTV was going to be there, and they were going to be hosting a Beyblade tournament. And so I went and I bought my first real Beyblade, which was a Woolborg at a Walmart. And then I bought Dronzer F on site at the tournament. And I made the worst possible combo you could make with those two Beyblades, which is using the Woolborg attack ring and the Dronzer F blade base, which is pretty much the opposite of, I think, what you would want to do with those two Beyblades. But I ended up somehow coming second in the YTV tournament, and from that moment on, I was pretty hooked. I remember going home, getting rid of all of my fake stuff. It's like, I'm gonna go legit now, and yeah, that's how it started for me.
That's really cool, actually, to hear. So we kind of started off a little bit similar, because I had a friend also tell me when Metal Fusion started airing, and then after I got hooked in it. Like, Beyblade's like the very same phenomenon where it gets so popular so fast, because the Toys R Us that we had here, like the Storm Pegasus was gone, the Rock Leone, I only had like the three Dark Beyblades that were released at the time that we could actually grab, and Noah Stadiums too. It was like impossible to find anything.
Yeah, I remember using fake stadiums too, and they were all very weird.
Yeah, so obviously big thing is the WBO. I want to kind of know what led to the creation of it, because you are the founder. Listen, you're the reason why I'm able to participate in events, why everyone's able to enjoy the hobby in different places in the world that's not just hosted by like WBA or like the random Hasbro events.
Well, first, thank you. I will say that you have many more people than you to thank for that, and like I'm probably like one of the smallest factors, because while I may have created the WBO, I feel like its biggest growth periods have been overseen by people who aren't me. Obviously, Kai V, who used to be a very active admin on WBO, Kay, who is like really carried the WBO, and from organizers like yourself. So thank you for that. But yes, going into how the WBO was founded, I had to start by talking about Off the Chain, which is the first Beyblade website I created when I was around 14 or 15 years old. And for context, I'm 34 right now, so a long time ago. And so that was the most popular Beyblade website for quite a few years, and up until I shut it down. I just wasn't super interested anymore at the time, and I had other stuff going on in my life. And there was a few other Beyblade sites that had popped up after that. But as I got access to my Beyblades again, which I kind of lost in storage for quite a few years, and I was starting to see that remnants of the community were forming online. And my main concern at that time was, is all this knowledge of Beyblade going to be lost? At the time, Metal Fight Beyblade hadn't been announced, so it was just Plastics and HMS that had been released. And then, of course, after HMS, maybe some of you listening know about Cross Arms, which was a very short-lived Beyblade successor. That was kind of like an action figure with a big gyro stuck in it, and they would like spin around and hit each other. There was like a few items released in that series, but Beyblade kind of died after that. So I created a BeyWiki, which was an open source Beyblade wiki alongside a set of message boards. But when we realized that there was going to be a new series of Beyblade, which really caught us all off guard at the time, it's kind of hard to appreciate now when we're about to head into the 4th generation of Beyblade with Beyblade X. It was incomprehensible at the time that Beyblade would ever come back. One of the things I always wanted to do was actually find a way to organize tournaments for Beyblade. I'd really loved my experience at the YTV tournament at Anime North, and then they would also host tournaments as part of a promotional thing they did called Weird on Wheels, which they hosted at the X in Toronto. But those tournaments were actually only, you could only go in if you were under 13 years old. And I remember the YTV staff being extremely nice to me and my 14-year-old friends, letting us play and kind of looking the other way. But it sucked to like go there and be like, oh, are they actually going to let us play? Or we just have to watch everyone else. And so I kind of saw that opportunity. And so I rebranded BeyWiki as the World Beyblade Organization. And we started out just like having like ranked 1-to-1 matches. There was no real tournament infrastructure to speak of. But after we ran, I think Beyblade's Not Dead and Anime North, which kind of kickstarted like the now long-running Beyblade North series of events, it just seemed to me possible that we could take what I was doing with the Anime North events, and I know other people were organizing tournaments at the time as well, and actually turn that into like a structured volunteer organization. And so, yeah, it just kind of seized the moment on Metal Fight Beyblade especially. It's like Beyblade's coming back. There's probably not going to be another opportunity to do this. And, you know, respect to Hasbro for everything they've done to widen the popularity of the game and bring it overseas. They were clearly not interested in supporting organized play. I think that's just the reality of it. And so if they were going to do it, someone had to do it. And I guess the last thing I'll say is I think Beyblade fans, you really yearn to play with other people. It's not like a card game, for instance, where you can either use an online client or use like an unofficial way of playing it, but still have the same experience. Like you can't replicate Beyblade digitally at all. You have to be physically there in person with other people to play it. And it can be really hard to find other players. And so ultimately, it seemed like a great opportunity to connect other players in real life and help them play Beyblade together. And that's why we did it.
No, it was really awesome to hear the story, and I think it's a very good cause, because especially too with how Beyblade goes, it's like they're only going to follow until the end. So what's really good about the WBO is how it's like any generation, so it's open to everyone. So it doesn't matter if you grew up in the original Plastics, Metal Fight, Burst, eventually X, right? What's good is that you can play whatever you want. You can like enjoy it, and other people. Like, it doesn't matter how old you are, because you're mentioning the whole age restriction thing. What's nice about the WBO is that even if you're older, you can, like, I've seen tournaments where people are a lot older, different walks of life. And I think it's been, like, such a good opportunity where it's, like, such a fan and community effort where a lot of staff, organizers, everybody, I'm going to correct what I said earlier, because it's not just you, obviously, everybody, all the community efforts to be able to do these great events, because... like TT is going to go from like the start to the end. They're not going to do any more burst tournaments now, or they're not going to do any more Metal Fight or Plastics, because that's not their market. They're not selling. So WBO is very, very good.
That's a really great point. And like, you know, like I mentioned, we started BeyWiki to make sure that the knowledge of Beyblade wouldn't be lost. But when we decided to switch directions to the World Beyblade Organization, the main focus was, oh, there's going to be a new Beyblade series. We should support that. And so I wouldn't say it's an accident, but it is like kind of a nice byproduct of starting WBO, where not only is knowledge being preserved, but actual gameplay environments are being preserved. People are still playing older formats to this day, even though Kay won't let me play with his HMS Beyblades. He says they're going to break.
Yeah, sorry, that threw me off. Yeah. I froze with ass for a second.
It's true.
Yeah, the HMS thing is true. I don't know, it just caught me off guard, yeah, because I was trying to get into HMS, but Dan told me, no, stay away. I was like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I was visiting Kay like a year or so ago, and I remember like, hey, can we play HMS? And he was like, no, we're not going to do that. I was
Yeah. No, but what was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say, too, that something that's also very unique was the whole thing you talked about with knowledge. I think right now, because Beyblade's been so expansive, it's been a lot of, like, an effort to make sure with how the wiki is, because I know the wiki was, like, this one place originally, and then after that it moved to, like, the fanon place, whatever, and that is, like, that weird thing to, like, the ad display, but, like, you know, like, preserving knowledge, I think it's what we do now, and the really benefit of Discord and all this stuff and threads and forums is, even though forums are still kind of hard a little bit to navigate, you know, we at least have a good, like, testing stuff documented, and at least now with Discord now, replies are a lot better to handle than, let's say, the forums, because it's a faster communication, like texting back and forth, and I think really the benefit, too, is that over the recent years, especially with Beyblade, is that even if something is old, so many things get discovered afterwards, like especially for the plastic generation, which I know Think, Dan, and a lot of other people have worked really hard on, like, updating a resource with their databases on, like, helping outdated info, because obviously, you know, back in the day, not everyone's going to realize, like, the proper methods and all that stuff, but I think what's been really good is that it just helps out people, because sometimes people just know on the casual side on how to do Beyblade, but the WBL definitely does have, like, a lot of good resources, or it helped birth other resources. Like, Kay has his Baybase, his blogging site, Think and Dan have their database, and I think it's been a really good opportunity to, like, help fans help each other, and also help each other grow in, like, different ways for community resources or advice or that type of stuff.
Yeah. Baybase from Kay is really excellent. I think Classics.db is the site you're talking about for Think and that group is also really excellent. Sometimes I will, like, look at, like, the first articles I wrote for BeyWiki. Like, I think one of the first ones I wrote is Death Gargoyle MS. And it's just like, wow, this is horribly written and, like, not really well organized at all. But before that, there was literally nothing.
Right.
And so it is really cool how I think we had pretty humble beginnings, but it ended up creating this culture of knowledge preservation that you see a lot of people building on today.
Yeah, and this is even good in the content creation. You have a lot of creators like Wombat, Blade Kid, Shin Dog, Dan, you know, a lot of people who do testing stuff and, like, video reference stuff. And I think testing and competitive is, like, so important. And, like, I don't mind when people write it down, but, like, having the video reference is just, it helps a lot. And also, it's good for other fans who are maybe searching now, because a lot of the content people are going to consume is likely video than reading. Yeah. But having both as a reference is still pretty good. And I'm just amazed, because I feel like more recently, there's been kind of that resurgence of it, because I feel like kind of how Beyblade works, how it's always worked, is kind of like, usually it's like the casual stuff will get, like, you know, the 10 million views, and then after, like, Storm Pegasus testings, maybe like 1,000, whatever. But I think it's good regardless. I think it's good to see people, like, are committed to helping, to doing videos, to explaining, and to, like, just help sharing their knowledge to everyone.
Yeah, totally. And, like, you need those, like, wacky 10 million view videos too, right? Like, it's really, like, Beyblade Geeks, for example, they've done so many excellent videos. And obviously they have a different approach. It's not like competitive testing most of the time. But
Yeah.
content like that like really helps grow the community too. And like you said, like there's different levels to players. Some are more casual, but I imagine many players start as casual players, and then as they discover different types
Probably,
of resources, whether the World Beyblade organization or other content creators like you just mentioned, they start to realize that the game actually goes really deep, and there's a huge community out there that's willing to support them too.
Yeah, and I feel too, it's just, and Beyblade X does a good job because they cover K's articles for the top 5. So then after, I know it's like a very good video because it's the K reference that they have on there. But I think that content is very good because it kind of helps resolve like a kind of a big issue with Beyblade sometimes, because most people's reference will always be like a stock battle. So not all the time like a stock combo that like the original combo is going to always be that good. And then if people realize, wait, hold on, the individual parts work, and I've suffered from this. I did not realize, how deep it actually was. And then after I realized, man, I need to stop judging the original release, because eventually you'll find out that like X, Y, and Z works, but not like the original.
Yeah. I remember when I first started getting into Beyblade and like looking online, people actually took the star ratings on the parts really, really seriously. Like that's how most people were judging how good parts could be. It's just really funny to think about like how far the community has come in terms of knowledge. And on your point about video, like obviously BeyWiki and written content is one thing, but I really do think the popularization of stuff like YouTube and video creation is what it enabled that community to explode so much and was able to spread so much knowledge so widely.
Yeah, that's been my approach more recently, because I was more as a fan perspective, but I also thought my goal whenever I'm going to be doing this is kind of like, let's explain it so that way if someone's casual, they can understand. I want them to always be accessible, because I feel like if you go too deep on and you start saying upper attack, LAD, like no one's going to know what the hell you're talking about. So you got to be like, okay, this spins pretty good. This does good against this, that, and this. So you always got to like...
The other day, how funny it is that the term life after death really, really stuck around. Because that was just a concept that was introduced by a Japanese player, Beholder, who used to run a popular website called Beyblade Damashi. But like, you could say that phrase is like kind of the product of language barriers, and yet it is still the way we describe that. Like, you could easily say like after spin, for example. Like, there's so many other terms we could have come up with, but life after death really stuck. And I think it's funny to see how terms just seem to survive through the community for a really long time.
Yeah, I think like equalizer or whatever, I remember like the original term or something was like zombies or whatever, and then after like we got more fancy with the names, because Metal Fight said the spin stealing Beyblade, even though if you think what spin stealing means, it doesn't make any sense logically, but it's like the fancy anime terms that they throw at us.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, zombie is again another term that originates from Japan, and is they're called zombies because they live after death, which is where the term life after death comes from.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, I gotta see. Okay, here, let's go back on the WBO then, because I realized I segued out of it.
All good.
Okay, so what was the original... Actually, I think we kind of touched this, but what was the original goal you had with the WBO? And has the goal stayed, or has it changed at all? I guess we didn't kind of talk about that. You kind of talked about, I guess, the original purpose.
So the original purpose was to preserve information about Beyblade. Then as we switched from being BeyWiki to the World Beyblade organization, I think the goal really became to create a competitive environment for Beyblade, for players to participate in. I think it's changed slightly, and it's maybe a little more open-ended now, where the WBO is really about bringing Beyblade fans together rather than it is strictly about creating a competitive environment. And we could probably talk a lot about different parts of the WBO, like their ranking system, for example, which I think, if we were to start from scratch, creating the WBO right now, we probably wouldn't orient everything around that so much. But at the time, my thinking, of course, was there is no competitive infrastructure for Beyblade. How can we give it some legitimacy? How can we give like goals and incentives for players to work towards? And our ranking system, which was honestly inspired just by like chess and other competitive games, is kind of how we settled on that. But I do think as the organization has grown, as everyone who's been involved with the organization has grown up and kind of matured as well. We've realized that it's not just about creating the most hardcore competitive environment, but about creating an environment that makes people actually want to play the game. And that can be different formats. That can be ranked versus unranked events. Ultimately, there's no like invalid way to enjoy Beyblade. Unless you're using old Hasbro stadiums. That's not valid.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough, I guess.
Really old Hasbro stadiums.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think definitely, because I remember what you said, it was mostly like information preservation, and I think it became more open-ended just to welcoming anyone. And I think talking to Shindog a lot, because he's basically what you said on the new purpose of it, and I agree with it quite a bit, because eventually when you get more people in, they go into competitive. And I think having a welcoming environment is something I do like in the events, because we've hosted now, I think like 3, and it's 4. He gave me the number 4. It's 4. And it's been nice to see a lot of new players come in, and we try to help out the new players. And if they have fake bays, we say avoid Amazon, because Amazon.com has like plagued with like a lot of fakes that people don't know. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, for Burst, it's very, very bad, because like for Metal Fight or even the plastics, it's a little easier to tell, but Amazon, it's like even more rampant because they have like a lot of third-party stuff on there, and that everyone's going to realize that like Euro Beyblade or Euro Spinning Top Gold, whatever, is like, is it real or fake?
Right.
But no, the environment, I think we always try to make it very welcoming. We try to lend whenever we can. And I think really it's been great to build a community, because obviously the biggest thing that hurt us, like in the Toronto community, was COVID, because like we can't host until if everyone's safe and the government can allow. So afterwards, it was like a breath of fresh air to like try to build from the ground up and try to like, build a strong community. I know a lot of areas kind of are in that similar vein that I talked to, where maybe not too many people, but you always have to start from somewhere. Even for us, if we have to see what events are doing the best. So like, if a Metal Fight event that we host now realistically is going to get like 4 people or 5, 6, 7, it's like, okay, how much does a Burst event get? If a Burst event gets more, try to get more people to come in to go to these events, because then after, most likely, they go to the other events. And it's trying to build a foundation, because you want people to keep coming. You don't want it to be like the 4 guys and you do like, I don't even know what you do at that point. I think you just talk to each other.
Yeah, and like, realistically, Metal Fight product is not accessible now. And so it's going to be mostly people that are familiar with Metal Fight that are going to want to continue those events. Not to say that people don't discover old generations and enjoy them. I certainly do. But that was one of the reasons why we made a big push into Burst when Burst launched as well. And Beyblade X is going to be launching soon. I think it's obviously disappointing when communities shrink, and COVID is certainly an exacerbating factor. I think it's unfortunate that obviously impacts a lot of communities. But you have to accept there's going to be a natural ebb and flow to things. The crazy thing is that now, as we're heading to the 4th generation of Beyblade, you can actually kind of expect that it's always going to come back in some form. And so I think you could even as maybe communities wind down, people start to like circulate out of the game, you can count on especially a new generation of Beyblade coming that's going to reinvigorate interest and maybe bring in both returning players and new players as well. I'm certainly looking forward to trying out Beyblade X.
Yeah, we'll cover that in a second. We'll cover that. We're almost there.
Sure.
We're almost at the X.
Sure.
You're good. No, but yeah, exactly what you said is kind of like even the thought process for Anime North, because if you factor in the people who are actually going to it that aren't from outside of here, it's like you probably have to do bursts and trying to work with Dan. I think we definitely made the right call for the focus. But listen, I'm not a Metal Fight hater. I like Metal Fight. I like plastics, whatever. But it's like we have to make sense on the community. But I do agree too. And the positive too is that when you build, and we're trying to build now. And I've talked with this with Kay and even Shindog. It's the benefit is now when you get to Beyblade X, you have at least built like a decent enough community, and probably even more because most people are going to be fresh. They're going to have time for X to adjust.
Yeah, totally.
So the next thing I'm curious about, because I was told about this and I was very surprised. It's about battle strikers.
Oh no.
And I know my friend Keo told me there's like it had like the Excalibur name or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, you guys predicted ahead of time. And you had like the whole pun on the name and everything. So I'm curious, man, on your background on battle strikers. I want to hear about it.
Sure. So for those who maybe don't know, Battle Strikers was a battling spinning top toy created by a company called Mega Bloks, obviously as a Beyblade competitor. I remember logging into World Beyblade Organization one day and seeing that someone from Mega Bloks had actually posted a thread about Battle Strikers along with a promo video, basically just wanting to get the community's feedback on it, I guess. And you can probably expect that they did not get a very warm welcome, including myself. I can't remember exactly what I wrote, but I'm sure I was like, maybe this isn't the right place for this. Because, most of us were not interested in a Beyblade competitor, and we had been pretty used to different Beyblade knockoffs. I guess I should mention now the unique twist Battle Strikers had on battling spinning tops was two elements. One was like a electrical launcher that the top magnetically attached to. You would hold down a trigger and it would rev up the top, and then you would kind of flick it to launch top. And then the other element was a controller, kind of like a plastic sleeve with a magnet inside of it that you put over your fingers.
Yeah.
And you could hover it over the top to kind of control its movements. It's honestly really fun. The reality, though, is that like for Series 1 at least, there was like one combination that just completely destroyed everything else. The thing there was that the designers on Battle Strikers at the time were not really familiar with the idea that Beyblade is a game. It's like a game with gameplay mechanics. Gameplay balancing is really important. They were just looking at it from like, oh, Beyblade is a spinning top toy. How can we put an interesting idea about toys in it? And that's where they came up with the magnetic controller concept. But anyway, the same marketing person that had posted on the site asking for feedback on the toy sent me a private message asking me if I wanted to come visit Mega Bloks where they were making the toy and give feedback there. And so I did that. I was in Montreal for like I think 1 or 2 days to talk to the team there, and I was certainly really critical of the work that they had done so far, and I called out the balancing issues. I called out the lack of design differentiation. Remember one thing that really jumped out to me is even though Metal Fight Beyblade was running in Japan at the time, there was no Beyblade in North America at that moment. And so it's actually a really incredible time to launch a spinning top toy because you know what TAKARA TOMY is doing in Japan, but they're not here yet. But they weren't even importing Beyblades to check them out and learn from them, which I thought was a really big miss. And apparently they really appreciated all that critique because they hired me that same day to work at Mega Bloks in marketing, which, at the time my job was like part-time at a clothing store at the mall. So the idea that I would suddenly be working marketing in a toy company was pretty unreal to me. So I obviously accepted that right away. And so I worked on the series of Battle Strikers known as Metal XS, which was, unsurprisingly, the more metal-focused version. The previous ones were kind of made of like a bulky, soft plastic, and Metal XS, I think it's fair to say, is more similar to Metal Fight Beyblade. I didn't work on the very first series. I did work on the other ones, and so if you see the ones with like the punny names, those ones are me.
Good.
Yeah. And so I worked on a few things. I worked on the second series of designs. I worked on the naming schemes and kind of the themes for the tops. I worked on the thing that I'm probably the most satisfied with from a design perspective, which was the knockout arena, which had kind of like a lowered lip where you could actually, if you hit the top correctly, it would hit the ridge and be knocked out of the arena. But wasn't a very well-selling toy line. And I'll say that the major thing was Series 1 had sold really well into retailers, but retailers weren't selling Series 1 really well. They had a lot of stock, but it wasn't really getting moved. And so that made it really hard when it came time to, hey, we actually had these way better designed, more interesting, more fun products now. Okay, great. We still have lots of Series 1, so we're not going to buy it. And so that was kind of the death knell for that toy line. Making toys is really hard, and Beyblade is, like, I think fair to say, one of, if not the best designed toy lines in history. It's totally up there with Transformers, for example, in terms of like its design quality and its legacy, I think. And so it's not something you can compete with half-heartedly. I think ultimately, I do think there's room for creation and experimentation in the spinning top space. I do think it's possible. Actually, I don't know at this point if it's possible for a toy line to dethrone Beyblade. I think Beyblade designers are also really on top of their game right now too, which you see in the more recent burst releases. But I guess it's fair to say I do think there's a lot of room in the battling toy space for creative new ideas.
It was really interesting to hear the stories. I'm just trying to take it all in. They let you in. They let you like cook all this good stuff, but they screwed up at the start. And then after a while, that sucks then. But you did good work either. Did you have like a favorite one in particular that you designed?
So to be clear, I'm not like a 3D designer.
Oh, no.
Actually,
but like
physically design any toys, but I did work with the design team there. We would do play testing together. We would talk about the themes together, and I would give feedback. I think I really like Megalodon, which is a shark themed top. It has a really cool color scheme with like a bronze and a silver shark on it. I'm not sure if you Google it if you'll be able to find that, listeners. Check it out if you can.
No, that's cool, man. So it's very interesting to kind of hear the perspective on there, because I think actually one of my first stadium was actually a Battle Strikers one, but I think it was like that big black square one. I don't know if you know what that is. Like I don't know. It was a Battle Striker stadium. That was the only thing I could get there. They were out of Beyblade stadiums.
Oh yes, that's the first stadium. Yeah, I didn't work on that one, so I can't be held accountable for your play experience.
It's a flat gameplay. I was like, man, this is how they play.
The stadium I worked on is flat too, just because with the magnetic control system, if you have a slope, you wouldn't
and
be
you can like
control it. But the elements we added was one. Having a slightly lowered wall with a ridge that if the top hit it, it's like a half-height ridge, so it would be not propelled outwards.
Yeah.
And then the stadium was actually circular, but we added like 2 inward slopes. And so you could actually toss the top through the stadium and it would like curve and go through the center rather than just circling around.
Something else I really liked was kind of how you kind of did the concept that like MagnaCore had, but like in a different take that I like. Because MagnaCore, it's just you place the magnets below, and then after it affects the base pattern when you launch on. But I like the idea that you actually control it with your fingers, because then after that, it's actually like a different type of gameplay, because like you're actually controlling it. I think it's a very good idea, actually.
Yeah, it worked pretty well, I would say. I think the main difficulty from a gameplay perspective was not having the 2 players' hands interfering with each other as they're trying to control the tops. It's definitely reminiscent of the Magna system from Beyblade. The funny thing is I have no clue if the people working on Battle Strikers actually knew about Magna system or if it's just a coincidence. Because they weren't super well versed in Beyblade history, so it's totally possible that it was just a coincidence, because Mega Bloks also had a long history in making magnetic toys. So I think it might have just been a result of that. It's funny you bring up Magna System. Super interesting series for Beyblade, but ultimately doesn't really amount to much. Yeah. I don't think people are like, oh, we got to play Magna System format. We got to get the magnetic pucks out under the stadium that slightly changed the movement patterns.
Yeah. They did like, I think like 2 stadiums, or technically there's 3. There's the green one, then there's the actual one. I was just in TT right now, and there's like the big one with like the red drums or V. Yeah, it was okay. It was okay for the execution, but the game, I think, it was alright. I think I like your concept a little bit more just thinking about it, but I want to kind of hit on the next point, which is kind of, because you've been here longer than I have to be able to enjoy Beyblade, so kind of like, what do you enjoy most about the hobby with Beyblade? Is it the competition? Is it the collecting? You know, kind of like, what's like, kind of like, you know what I mean? Like the passion for Beyblade that you have, because I feel like everyone kind of has different. Some just like the competitive side, some like just the anime. You know, everyone has a different reasoning.
So first, I feel obligated to point out that I'm not an active Beyblade player.
Right.
I haven't played Beyblade that much since the early Burst series, which I'll just talk briefly about that. The durability issues back then were so bad and really, really hurt my enthusiasm for playing.
Yeah.
But in terms of what I really do like about Beyblade, I think the idea that you have this spinning top game that has so much strategic depth and so much uniqueness in terms of how the matchups work is just really novel and interesting. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about Beyblade from like casual observers is that it has to be a game all about luck. They see the two tops go in the stadium, they see them like collide with each other, and then they see that one wins, and it's like, oh, okay, sure. Once you start to understand why matches go the way that they do, why this part is able to interact with this part in a certain way, stuff like spin stealing, which you mentioned earlier, which is a super fascinating concept, which I think sounds totally fantasy made up to a normal person. I just think that physical interactions and the way that they form like this strategic game is really interesting. And then, of course, the way it brings people together, like I mentioned before, because there's not really a way to enjoy Beyblade remotely. It really drives people to want to seek out other players. Because like you can play Beyblade by yourself, yeah, but it's not really a fulfilling experience in the same way that playing with other players is. And then the last thing I'll say is the designs are just really cool. Like that's something that's been consistently good ever since the very start of Beyblade, and up till the most recent burst releases. And I'm sure Beyblade X will have really impressive, interesting designs as well.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, because this was where I was going to talk about the 3 generations thing. I think something in general that I actually hate with Burst, well, I think actually I enjoy Burst, I think, because I've played Burst more than Metal Fight is. Even though I grew up with Metal Fight, I got more into Burst just because I think I like it a little bit more. But yeah, the durability thing is especially something that I feel that like in 10 years from now, it's going to be very difficult for some legacy formats to live, just because the teeth break down. Like maybe for Classic, they can use the Hasbro layers because they have slopes, but yeah, it's a very scary thing. But
is teeth wearing down still a really common issue in Beyblade?
Well, yeah. It's maybe not to like the extent of like Classic, where you had to buy like 15 Death Scythers just to like compete, or Kane had like 10 Valkyrie layers, but like
Valkyries would wear down in like 10 games. Like it was just ridiculous.
Yeah, and especially now because there are tighter locks, because there's a thing called the dash driver where it's the red cap gold spring and you lock it together. So yeah, like tighter locks, right? So then after that's like even more. So it becomes like, okay, it's a little bit tougher. And it's good for them, right? Because people have to buy more. But then after, when this thing's over with, it's like, well, damn, the scalpers are going to go crazy.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think, one of the downsides of Beyblade is being such a physical game. It's not like a card where you read the text on the card. The card will always do the same thing no matter what condition it's in. Beyblades just naturally wear down over the course of being normally used. I know I'm the one that started the whine about your breaks thread on the WBO when I broke 2 Uriel 2 Bay bases within the span of 30 minutes. Ideally they don't break that easily, but I think it is just a natural consequence of what Beyblade is. That stuff is going to break down over time.
And that's at least why for some Metal Fight fans, they get to dance happy, because Metal Fight's just metal contact. Like the metal's not, you store it properly, it's not gonna break down or anything. But more surprising to me actually is what I've really discovered, because as more as I've gotten into, talking like Thing, Shindog, Dan, Nizuma, Neo, so many people, just realizing like the plastic generation gets a very bad rep for people getting into it, because People think that it's very expensive to get into, it's very hard, or the things break easy. I think it's like a lot of weird misconceptions, maybe because they never got into it, but like, I'm very surprised. I think plastics is like the easiest thing to get into if you're trying to do Beyblade stuff. Like, people in Japan don't play it anymore, so all the lots and everything are like a lot cheaper than you would expect. And I think it's really good. And you'll always have it where some things are gonna get like power scaled on the pricing. So like Uriel 2, because things like anime and all that stuff, and like the rarity, you know, it costs a little bit more.
Yeah.
Or some things will just get some random resurgence, like Poseidon will go up like great. I hate trying to find Poseidon right now. I still can't. There's like the Manta Diver. Metal Fight, you have like Dual Uranus. What's like so much other, and Burst you have it like especially too, because the toughest thing with Beyblade 2 is that a lot of times if there's limited production, when they're doing like, let's say 1,000, that's it. So it becomes very difficult afterwards for people to access stuff. Well, that's kind of where I wanted to segue into this, because I wanted to ask you about it. Because Hasbro, since plastics was doing pretty good, I know Engine Gear, whatever, there's some weird stuff they kind of, but everything's pretty much good there. Metal Fight, everything was pretty much good. 4D, kind of, they screwed around a bit, but then they did the normal releases, and like Shogun Steel is more or less like fine, other than like some weird modifications on the facebolt. But Burst is where they changed very differently. So I'm kind of curious, what do you think kind of like how Hasbro has been? Because this just popped in my head. Because Hasbro is like drastically different in how they've adapted the products here in the West.
Yeah. I guess I'll start my explanation by saying this is not a review of how commercially successful they've been.
Yeah.
I don't know if Hasbro even knows. Do their decisions to change the design of the product produce more sales? What I can say is I really strongly dislike their approach with Beyblade Burst. And I think when you compare it to what they did with plastics, HMS, and their version of Metal Fight, Metal Fusion, it just seems worse. Like they downgraded a lot of parts. They totally changed the construction system, which also hurt my enthusiasm for Burst a lot when I realized that it was going to completely divide the global community, which was not an issue we ever had to deal with in the past.
Right.
I think it doesn't seem to me, in the way that Hasbro brands and markets Beyblade, that they really understand what makes it such an interesting game. Whereas like when you watch the TAKARA TOMY videos, whenever they have a new Beyblade out and they like show off all the new features and stuff, like they focus on the smallest design details and they really talk about how the parts affect the gameplay experience.
Right.
And then you see a Hasbro thing and it's like people at a skate park or whatever. And they have these weird gimmicks like Slingshot, I think.
Yeah.
I know they removed a lot of the metal from a lot of Burst releases and then re-released them later under like Pro branding, I believe.
Yeah.
I've heard some rumors that TAKARA TOMY might handle the global release for Beyblade X, and I will say I think that would be great.
Yeah. I definitely agree with they have no idea, because like just to give context, I guess, to the viewers, like their Metal Fight marketing is like the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Like in the Japanese marketing, they have like the CGI thing, they have like the avatar, like the base spear thing come out, like okay, that's cool, that makes sense, and they show the gimmicks. Hasbro's like the weirdest thing, like they got motorcycles and they're in like this dome thing going around, or they're like in like these weird gang under, I don't know, like who do they think they're marketing it to?
I think the first video they did for Metal Fusion is like this like underground cage match style thing. And like, I'll say I actually love that video. I think it's so funny and so interesting. Does it make Beyblade look fun? Not really. And I think that's the core difference where like, I don't know, Hasbro's marketing of Beyblade comes across as almost self-conscious, like, oh, it's a spinning top, it's dorky, we gotta like make it look really cool somehow. What if we had like a cage, or what if we had motorcycles?
Yeah, I definitely feel like the marketing they tried to do was trying to like sell some weird experience with Beyblade rather than like Beyblade itself. I think with Burst, the marketing definitely got better, but also worse to an extent, because the Burst marketing focuses a lot less on the customization part. And I think it was up until Switch Strike, they would still show, oh, you could customize or whatever. And when you neglect that part of the Beyblade that makes it so interesting, that's what leads to like a bigger war where people who only get Hasbro don't realize that there is an actual fun side. And a very important thing that you mentioned is how, yes, in the TAKARA TOMY videos, they always highlight the details, the gimmicks. Oh, we can do this, that, and this. Okay, maybe not all the time everything works, but it's part of the design. It's like part of the identity of that Beyblade. So it always hurts to see the Hasbro stuff because, like, part of the identity, it feels like almost like a parody of what it should be, not exactly what it is. It's like they're just kind of riding along. Cause I'll be honest, I think even Burst, even if I think Burst is anime, I'm not the strongest on some seasons, I still think it's still entertainment to a certain extent. The battles are still fun. And I feel the issue is that it's the same thing that happened with Metal Fight. It's that they got too greedy with it because I think, I don't know if I covered this in the history video when I talked about it, but like they did Bay Warriors, the Bay Wheels,
oh God.
Raiders,
Bay
right?
Warriors is so weird.
They dug a hole to themselves because now they lost a lot of money. The anime was canceled. It's wasted. And I remember me and my father, we went to New York Toy Fair, we talked, and I was like, if you notice in the interviews, whenever they mention like these RC stuff or Ripfire, the most important thing they'll always emphasize on is cross-compatibility. Now, why was that? It's because Stealth Battlers, Tornado Tops, all these spin-off stuff were not compatible with the mainline product. So there's less incentive for someone to necessarily get it. And they don't know what they're doing. Like, okay, Switch Strike, what does that mean? I don't know, it sounds cool. They have abilities. Okay, sure. Turbo, what does that mean? Slingshot. They always tried to focus on the stadium. And this is actually even reflected on the anime, because obviously everyone knows the anime is kind of just like the advertisement for the toy. But at least with stuff like Bakuten Shoots in the original Beyblade, they tell a very good story, and it doesn't feel like an advertisement. But like, when you get to like Burst, you can definitely tell that when it was from Turbo onwards, they specifically made like this deal with TAKARA TOMY for the animation where they have to showcase like these Hasbro stadiums that they'll release later on. And it's a very unique relationship when you think about it, because like, wow, so they have to basically find some way to incorporate to the story. So, but it's weird too, because there's definitely a disconnect between the Japanese script writers and like the Hasbro team, because they'll like go like, this is called like the Speedstorm Stadium, and they'll call it, oh wow, this is the Lightning Battle Stadium.
Yeah.
So it's always entertaining to see.
It can't be easy to coordinate all that. I also I wonder how TAKARA TOMY feels, how the Japanese Beyblade design and marketing teams feel about the stuff Hasbro does with the toy line. Maybe they think it's really cool. We don't actually know, right?
Yeah, so actually there was, in the behind the scenes, there was basically kind of like where they talked about how it works. So like there's like the TAKARA TOMY person, there's the Hasbro person, and Hasbro basically has the influences on the Western market. So to them, they don't really care. If it sells or if it does whatever it can, then that's whatever. And also too, with Hasbro, it's kind of how like they pay for the stuff for the base too for TAKARA TOMY to do, because the thing I think that was introduced in Burst that was very new was the idea of like Hasbro exclusives, where they actually get the designers from TAKARA TOMY to design unique stuff for the Hasbro stuff. Well, I think it was maybe to compensate for how different the two brands are, to have some kind of content there. And it's even funny because on one of the more recent ones, which I can't remember who gave it, but I think we did a report on it, even like the TAKARA TOMY designers will design specifically for like Quad Drive, but like even Hasbro won't follow the paint details that the designers did for them. So it's always like entertaining to find out how do they cheap it out on like the bare minimum, because like, you know, the bays are, it's going to the point where you just have to hope for the next generation that we don't get to the same path that like Burst got into.
Yeah, you definitely feel that cost cutting is a big factor in a lot of Hasbro's decisions around the Beyblade toy line. And that was really clear from even the first release of Burst.
It feels
like it's been a... Yeah.
Even this, I wanted to tell you, actually, this is probably going to surprise you a little bit. So, Pro Series, right? It's basically like a TAKARA TOMY import, right? Kind of like Hyperblades. So the thing is, the first thing about them is that it's not the same as TT because they actually pay for cheaper materials to produce them. So teeth wear and all this stuff and breakage is even more common with Pro releases. And even more than that, Hasbro basically has a catalog for what parts they pick. So obviously, if newer parts are going to cost more if they want to pay for it. So what does Hasbro do? On parts that would make sense for them to pay, like let's say there's a Dash version of this driver or this, that, or this, they always go on like the cheapest extent possible. Like they start off with like Cho-Z Valkyrie and they pick the regular Jolt, not Jolt Dash. Even what's hilarious, just how incompetent they were. And I freaked out because they sent me a set before I got blacklisted, right? On the Pro Series set, it was Destroy Dash. But I think even still to this day, the Destroy Dash is not even Dash. It just has the red cap. They fixed it later, but it's just to show they don't care. They just say, okay, well, let's just higher marketed price. And then after it led to my conspiracy theory, I thought, what if the Bees are just done really bad now? Because there have been examples that Hasbro's done recently where they've had the gimmicks, like Jet, even though Jet didn't have the rubber, Mirage had the rubber. Like some like they had the gimmicks to a certain extent before now, because Quad Drive and Quad Strike is current. They have nothing now. It's all plastic, nothing. But
oh dear,
I felt this was on purpose because to them it's to kind of be predatory towards like the parents who think, oh, okay, if I want like this bay, I have to spend a lot more money, like almost like double the price of like the average bay that someone would get. And it's unfortunate because like Pro could be a very good thing because there are some releases for Pro Series like we had in the past, like they were easy to access. Like Metal Fight was like probably like such a good era because of accessibility. Like Grand Cetus, Prize Bay is easy to get, Perseus, like so much stuff easy to access. And Pro could have been there, and like Pro is still like okay, some are hit or miss, but like I definitely think this ending off. Like I just wish they cared about kind of the community side because I feel like they have such an opportunity to grow themselves. Like they're hosting all these events and on social media, like, oh, we're hosting this event here, there, and there. And I'm like, hey, like the WBO exists, like to support Hasbro to host their events, like it could be something, but like it's such a shame how neglectful they are to kind of like the people who really, I think, actually help spend the money for their products and like do the effort to at least see if the bays are good or not.
The truth is they're thinking about so much of a bigger market than the competitive community, right? And that's not to excuse any of the decisions they make. But I find it very difficult to understand why they take the approach that they do. If it's one thing if like, hey, we need to lower the retail price to make the product accessible, but then you can do the Pro Series, which should be like the most pure experience imaginable for the players that really want that. But even then, there's compromises made. And, ultimately, Beyblade is not a toy that needed Hasbro to make it good. Like, the original Beyblade toy line designed by TAKARA TOMY is a great product. It doesn't need Hasbro's creative input to be a great product. So yeah, I'm sure there's a business strategy behind it. It's not like, oh, they're just stupid or they don't.
No,
there's some kind of thought going into it, but I cannot fathom what it is.
I think it was just with the stadiums. I think because I'll be honest, like the original Hasbro stadiums has like the same issues like Metal Fight and Plastics do, which I do know the reason why is because of like they have to redesign for like the Western market, so that way they can't have the same exit. But the whole idea was like these flashy stadiums where it's like, oh, but the thing where they did the mistake is that every time there was a gimmick stadium, it was always just like a cool site, but it never like forced it too bad. I guess you can maybe say Magnacore, I guess, but like even then you have the option to take out the magnets if you want to. But the issue is that once they got to Relay Turbo, they really forced it where you have to enjoy it this way in particular. And they killed the alternative. Even Pro Series is technically not a alternative because it's TT based. You can't really mix and match properly because if you do a TT driver in like a Hasbro layer, it's a different locking mechanism for like the height or whatever. So I think there's someone at Hasbro who thinks, guys, we're going to make so much money. Call it Pro Series, the competitive edge, Japanese deco, right? They throw all these like buzzwords. They think, oh my God, competitive. And then you find out it's like, well, how many of these releases actually make sense?
Yeah.
But I want to ask this now because we kind of talked about it more on the Hasbro side. But in terms of the 3 generations, which one was? Because we'll lead into X, and after I'll ask about the WBO thing to end off. In terms of the 3 generations, do you have like a personal fit? Well, actually, I guess we'll eliminate bursts because your only burst had like a little bit earlier. So I guess between Metal Fight and Plastics, kind of which was your favorite one? Did you like anything from maybe any of the 3 generations that you thought they did a pretty good job in particular?
First, to say between MFB and Plastics, but my answer is HMS. HMS.
Oh, true.
The most perfect form of Beyblade, except for, except for we were talking about it's very fragile now. I really like. I was listening to your interview with Kay, and he was talking about what he likes about HMS, and like I honestly feel the same way in a lot of ways. I really like the size of the Beyblades, how compact they are, combined with how heavy they are. I really like the purity of the design. Like you can look at any part in HMS and immediately understand how it's supposed to function from a gameplay perspective. Okay. Circle upper, which is like one of the best upper attack parts, it's literally just a big metal ring with 2 huge slopes on it. You know that that part is designed to lift up Beyblades. You have the very huge spikes on the Dragoon MSUV attack ring. And of course, Grip Flat Core Ultimate Mode is literally just a huge red rubber flat tip.
Right.
I do think HMS is not really a balanced series. There's only like a few really good combos. And most of the parts are not like competitively viable. I also think making it so every top can spin both left and right is really difficult from a gameplay balancing perspective, and from like just a gameplay perspective. It's like, hey, are you going to spin left or right? I don't know. It's kind of like just a 50-50 guess all the time. I do think ultimately HMS has the most things I like about Beyblade design, which is the compact size and the really clear gameplay mechanics. That's how I think every generation does something pretty well. Plastics is obviously the original. I think there was some really creative ideas in there with Magnet System, with engine gears. Not all of them pan out that well in terms of like, are they actually fun or competitive or interesting?
Yeah.
But they were trying a lot of different stuff. And again, something I really love about Plastics and HMS is the simplicity, the purity of the design, the fact that like they're designed to look cool, but also like you can feel that they start with the shape first and then they add design elements on top of it, which is not what I feel when I look at like more recent burst releases, I would say, where it seems like the aesthetic is really what's driving the design.
Yeah.
I will say the one thing I like, Metal Fight Beyblade is an extremely cool series. Obviously, having full metal attack parts is awesome. The thing that I think in retrospect is the coolest element is the height variance and how they made Beyblades of different heights actually a core part of the game. And it's something I kind of missed in burst, especially because upper attack is one of my favorite strategies in the game. And not being able to have lower Beyblades made that a lot less viable. Finally, I do want to heap some praise onto burst. One, for being the longest running Beyblade generation ever, I think. And just so clearly a huge commercial success. I don't personally love the burst mechanic, although I think in more recent releases it's toned down to a way where it's not as disruptive. Early burst was very disruptive. Stuff was bursting just constantly, and like we talked about earlier, the teeth durability was a real issue. But it's such a unique gameplay idea, and I think the design of burst is also really cool. But yeah, ultimately HMS is my favorite.
Right. Something I think was really good you touched on was kind of the design perspective of it. I didn't really think of it in kind of that way, how they kind of think of the design first of what the shape is, and then they just insert the motif. I feel like I feel like usually afterwards, the kind of more it's the motif than it's the rest of it. I mean, especially with the burst, it very much feels kind of like the extension there rather than just kind of what kind of shapes did they do. So sometimes, I mean, burst kind of got creative here and there. You know, they did take some risks. And I think something else that you kind of touched on a little bit was kind of how experimental TT was at the start. I think Beyblade at when they're at their best is when they experiment with stuff. Magnacore, engine gear, burst did like a suction cup driver, a projectile. I think not every single time they have to design it where it's to be pure competitive. I think when they take these risks where it's cool gimmicks, that type of stuff, that's also really interesting because it allows them to kind of, you know, flow with creativity. I think Burst, for the most part, did pretty good. I think Metal Fight, the only thing I think Metal Fight did the best out of all three was definitely what you said on the height variants. I think height is such an interesting concept because there's low heights, there's mid heights, there's like tall height. And that like allows for a lot more unique matchups and gameplay. And I kind of wish we got that with Burst because we kind of did it with like high drivers, but it was kind of too late and they didn't do that many. And it was weird too because like, sorry, go on.
I know some of the recent Burst releases had high mode and low mode, but I don't know how impactful those ended up being on the game.
Okay. So... Okay, I'll cover that, then I'll cover the first part, then what you just said. I was going to say, every time they've done like a new driver variant, you'll notice that every single time that they start off, it's always like the original driver. So it's always like XL, Fusion, without fail. High XL Dash or High Zephyr, like always like a season 1 driver. I feel like, I don't know, they could have tried more, and they kind of did. I feel like they're maybe afraid on some things, but like I feel like even though obviously with Beyblade you'll hit a point where you can't do completely and you'll always be reminiscent of something else. I think it's how they execute it. Like the Generate driver is kind of reminiscent of Final Survive, but it's like a different take on how it activates, how it works, or you know, the shape and that type of stuff. But what you're saying with low and high mode, which was interesting, I think low and high mode and like the armor thing was definitely the best execution that they did in terms of metal weight, because GT had like these layer weights, but I don't feel they were correctly executed on how the weight distribution was. At least with DB and BU, it actually feels like something. Like, I'll have to correct myself because Cake did correct me, now the physics work on this. For the armors, some can be more balanced than others on certain layers. And low and high mode, there's at least more of an interesting game because of kind of height. Not necessarily attack, but mostly on the stamina side, and not really just opposite spin, kind of same spin too. So it was always kind of slept on for a gameplay mechanic, but, you know, I want to kind of, before we talk about the WBO, kind of end off the question, kind of on Beyblade X, kind of what do you think so far from what we know, since our next piece of information at the time of this recording is going to be May 14-ish? Yeah, about that.
Well, I didn't know that. Can you, before I answer that, can you help me understand what's confirmed about Beyblade X so far? I think I heard that they're going to verse still. Is that accurate?
I'll recap. Okay, so anything that you saw, however you saw it, whoever told me, right? We don't reveal whoever it was, right? But of course, it's supposed to burst again. From what we were told from a trusted source, because they helped us during like BU on the releases confirm it. So they're supposed to burst again, and they told us like the name ahead of time. The point system is supposed to be 1 point OS. It should be 2 points burst and 3 points KO. And the stadium design, even though it's like a weird side shot, I'm sure you've seen, but it's like a weird kind of like path divider where if they hit it, it'll kind of push them back to the center. So it definitely kind of feels a little bit influence on like the Hasbro. Okay, he's going to get the image. All right. Okay, so.
Yeah.
For the stadium, you know, what do you think about it?
Okay, so the first thing I'll say, which I mentioned earlier, is I really hope there's no durability issues at launch. I really think that really sours the new experience of a new generation. I remember with Burst, the Bay launcher, the string one, was only included in like the deluxe set with the stadium and the Valkyrie at the start. I remember breaking my Bay launcher and having to buy a whole other DX set just to get another one. So I hope that that's not an issue. I hope they nail the stadium design. It's hard to say from the image that we saw. I think probably a lot of people will see that indentation and be like, oh no, they're trying to get too creative with it again. Why can't they just give us a good, straightforward stadium?
Right.
I want to see how it actually plays before I would rush to judgment on it. But I do think having a core stadium and really nailing that experience is really important. I was going to... Did you want to add something?
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're finishing the thought. I don't want to interrupt. No, I was going to say, I definitely think, regardless of the points, I definitely think the stadium's an interesting approach. I feel like the issue that they'll always have is that if they have like a good idea, they always try to build off it, but try it again. Like HMS was a good idea. They tried it again with Metal Fight, and it was a different execution for how they all worked and all that stuff. Even if these things like Burst again, I always feel it's going to be somehow a little bit different, and I hope it's going to be better than Burst, because as much as I can say this, that, and this, I do hope the bursting is done in a way where it's not like it doesn't hinder the designs of Beyblade. It's like, I feel like the biggest thing I hate with Burst, especially early on, is that there's sometimes pretty good designs that are affected by the fact that they burst, like the original Chaos, good stamina layer. This thing will explode, cut your eye in like 2 seconds if it gets hit by like Valkyrie.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that was intentional. Obviously, when they design Beyblade, they know it's going to last many, many years. They intentionally need to start low and scale the power level up over time. And obviously, with Burst, one of the most obvious ways you can do that is, okay, we made it easy to burst at the start. We'll make it harder to burst as it goes on. I don't think they got the balance quite right. I think the early gen Burst stuff just burst way too easily. And so I'm hoping that's something that's fixed right out of the gate for Beyblade X.
I agree.
I think it would be cool if they didn't start with flat, semi-flat, sharp, and ball-shaped tips this time and just basic plastic materials. I think it would be cool if they kind of jumped ahead a bit and maybe start with like a metal flat, maybe like a POM plastic sharp tip.
Right.
Even if it doesn't have free spin or anything, just something that make the design a lot more interesting. And I think going straight from Burst and into a new generation makes it a bit harder of a sell in the sense that the plastic HMS was gone for a few years before Metal Fight came out, and then Metal Fight was gone for a few years before Burst came out. It was like, okay, cool, we're starting over. We'll start with these really basic shapes. Now you're asking an audience that's already familiar with Beyblade Bursts and might have a huge collection of it to switch straight into this new generation. I think maybe they will, but I think it's harder. It's a harder sell if you just start with really basic, kind of underpowered parts. There needs to be something really cool out of the gate to convince people that were invested in Burst to continue investing with Beyblade X.
He's saying high-speed battles. That was like the marketing or whatever for it.
Yeah, that would be cool. The worst parts of Beyblade is when two tops are just going... like that. Even though that's a part of the game, it's never as exciting as seeing like Beyblades moving really fast and hitting each other and having high recoil power and stuff like that, which is, again, one of the things I like about HMS so much. Even stamina stuff, it's hard. Everything in that gen hits hard. It would be cool to see the Beyblades actually use all of the stadium space that they have with more interesting movement patterns.
I think
something... change back.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. Something you definitely said that I think was a very good point, that even I realize this now that you've said it, is that they definitely do almost the exact same way. They start off with like the basic flat, the basic ball or kind of cone. Like it's kind of like the same approach, and then they go afterwards. It's very, I think maybe like, if it's not broken, to keep on doing. But I definitely think I agree with you that they probably have to find some way to make the gameplay interesting at the start, especially with like the components of it. Hopefully it's custom. I just want it to be customizable. I want it to be the one thing I only want is maybe a similar creep to kind of like plastics, because plastics was kind of like everything's almost equal to each other. That's what I love about it. That's why I got into it like a lot, because I'm like, wow, unlike, let's say, Metal Fight or Burst that require legacy formats to control power grid, plastics, it's like, it's all pretty good. And
Yeah.
this stadium's very interesting. I want to see, obviously, how it does as well. I think that was kind of their answer to maybe how do they make it different from Burst. And I think that's the way they have to do it. And they could always just release some stadium afterwards as like the typical 3 exit. But I feel, at least the good thing about this, which is going to be one hell of a segue I'm about to get into, is that even if, let's say, we don't like the stadium, the benefit is that the WBO, good proposal by Crisis Crusher and also helped by Think, was limited and unlimited. So to give quick context to the viewers that are listening, WBO fan-run organization, as we already covered, it's kind of always been, kind of like inspiration from TT, but also WBO modified. But, always there's kind of like some conflicts on, how do we define this? How do we define that? All these like long debates that eventually get tiresome. And the good answer to this was kind of how, competitive you have like different rule sets. So unlimited is more of a WBBA focused rule set where it kind of focuses more on how like TAKARA TOMY handles the gameplay. And limited, which I think is really smart, and again, hats off to Crisis Crusher and Think, mostly Crisis Crusher, but Think also helped assist with the proposal. But the limited is like more on the WBO side and focuses more on the band stuff. And what's really genius about this is that, let's say the stadium, let's say the stadium, and not too many people like it too much, they don't agree with it. Okay, we have the opportunity now where we can just use a different stadium that's approved for, let's say, limited. Or, and for banning too, like I remember originally in Burst, we had the issue where it took a long time to ban. The original Death Scyther, like, dominated like crazy. And like, now we can have it where it's like, hey, if this is a problem, if you want to play this layer, you can do it in unlimited ranked. If you want to do a gameplay event where it's ranked, but you don't want that allowed, okay, we have that banned currently. And what that does is it also solves a big issue that WBO kind of has with kind of unranked stuff. Because for me personally, if Dan or Kay or whoever is hosting is going to do unranked and I can make it, I always try to support. But, and something you touched on was the idea of ranked, that the issue that we always are going to have is that some people are too consumed by rank for attending. And to me, it's a fun game. If you want to, get a little competitive, I think that's fine. But it kind of leads to the issue where if something's not ranked, you're not likely to attend. Or if there's a ban in place that you don't agree with, I don't want to attend. But like, and this was kind of talked with Think, and it's always like a community process. And I feel like the proposal at least helps like mitigate a lot of these issues, because now we don't have to deal with that. Now, especially moving on to Beyblade X, we have like this good solution. But I was curious on your perspective on this in particular.
So I think one thing that's interesting is like this framing that the WBO and the WBBA are like opposing concepts, which was totally never the intention. The idea of the WBO is to do internationally what Hasbro wasn't doing, what TAKARA TOMY was doing in Japan, which is supporting organized play for Beyblade. I think sometimes we've made decisions that kind of contradict some of the WBBA rule sets, or stepped in at times when we knew that they wouldn't. And I think the banning of the Odin layer early in Burst is a good example of that, where it's just like, we were seeing that everyone at top tournaments was running the same combo. We were seeing the level of enthusiasm for the game go down because people felt they either needed to play this kind of boring combo, to be honest, in order to win, or they just didn't really have much of a chance. And so that's why we would make a decision like that, which is that, the mission for WBO is to bring Beyblade players together. If there's something happening in the game that disincentivizes people from playing to begin with, that's something we want to address. I do think the rankings is an interesting thing. And I'll say before I say any more about that, this is all my perspective as an individual, not as someone working on the WBO. I'm not super involved in the day-to-day stuff. I mean, we mostly leave that stuff to the organized play team to make their own decisions. And I give feedback very irregularly.
Right.
Ultimately, what the community wants is going to be the right thing to do most of the time. And so people are saying that, we don't want to be held to the specific rule set all the time. We want to be able to use our own stadiums or do our own formats. That's totally something we should embrace. If there's something in the WBO's rule set that people seem to largely like less compared to the WBBA rule set, and that's something that we should probably consider changing. With the rankings thing, like, this has gotten really out of hand, I'll say. Especially with the way that there's no like seasonal reset. People look at the top players and see this like
as like gods
of players. Yeah, and it's like that's not the reality, right?
Yeah.
The reality is they were able to accumulate a lot of points during a specific time period that makes it really hard for other people to break into that list. And I will say that like those challenges with the ranking system are well known among the staff of the WBO for sure. It's not something that's been like chosen to be ignored. It's actually really complicated technical reasons and a lack of development resources that have made that hard to deal with. But I do know that the team wants to improve that experience because that focus on like the worldwide rankings isn't super healthy, and the rankings as they are today like just aren't an efficient system for measuring the current power level of the current player base. You covered a lot of topics in your prompt for this question, but I hope I was able to get to what you were looking for there.
No. It's whatever you want to answer. And even then, I know it's not easy, but I know a lot of people like Cake, or even I offered if they need help with where's the right person to go to, because obviously the WBO sites, like it's an outdated form like PHP that they're on, and obviously if they're going to update, it's going to take a lot because they have to see, because the site's going to eventually break down because it's outdated. But hopefully, when we reach that point before Beyblade X, we can kind of get to that. But the rankings thing is kind of why I wanted to kind of take a little bit on my own hands, because especially when X starts, when I want to be hosting with Dan, and eventually when Kay, whenever he comes back to Canada here, to have like our own Toronto regionals, because I feel like a big issue is something that you said, where I don't feel because there's no reset or decay, it kind of leads to the issue where if someone's at the top, nobody can really shine as strongly or accurately reflect it, because there could be new players that are pretty good at the game but not accurately reflected. So kind of like the goal that we're trying to set up here, we're still trying to find what's the best way to kind of do it. But the idea was kind of to have, regional rankings here for our area here in Toronto, and we would reset it every season, but we would have it where, we have like, my father said like this custom point system that eventually we'll try to roll out and see how it works. But, just the idea that like people here who go to our events feel represented. So it's like, hey, if you attended Dan's event and like Beyblade X ranked whatever, okay, you did well in this event, so now you're number 6 in Toronto, and maybe overall you're like number 255 or something, right? But like, I think it's very important to kind of just like feel represented, and whatever they decide. I think just the end goal is just kind of feel like when you go to it, you kind of feel a part of it, and that's something especially that I'm always talking with Dan with for prizes for what we can do, even talking with Think. How can we kind of help WBO kind of feel really close to the community, what other ways? And it always falls down to like the biggest issue, which is just the website, because I feel like WBO is kind of in a sense a fossil, like kind of like a T-Rex skeleton, where kind of it's like if we make right changes, I think the WBO is the thing that's keeping Beyblade strongly alive, because I don't feel true Beytubers too do a good job, but I feel like for like the wider community, if Beyblade was done and over with, like every Beytuber would just be dead. But because of the WBO, there's still a community that's alive for it. And I've talked to like Kay and Think, and I've always tried to offer my help on that side. But I think ending off, I think WBO is a very good opportunity moving forward, because especially in a generation where it's a lot more technology that's consumed, and it's a little bit less kind of the forums, because I feel like some kind of treat the forums kind of like a social media kind of like Twitter or something, where kind of like they interact. But it's like kind of like what the original forums were. It's not like kind of like the same thing where you would think something like Twitter or like Facebook or like a YouTube comment section. But I I have faith that hopefully, things go around. But I want to end off with saying, obviously thank you for your time. And if you have anything at all you want to plug at the end, anything, any side hobby, whatever, floor is yours to plug, man.
First of all, thank you for having me. I do want to touch on what you just said about the WO really briefly before we wrap up. As you're well aware, worldbeyblade.org website is built on a message board software called MyBB. And it was a really great solution for us for a long time because it was actually very easy to find developers who knew MyBB and develop custom functionality for us.
Right.
A few years back, quite a few years at this point, I redesigned the site to be like mobile friendly, to have the new events pages and stuff like that. But you're right, it is in a rough spot right now. It's very difficult to find developers to develop new functionality at this point, which is why issues like the rankings thing has gone for so long unresolved. So we are looking at other options. Don't want people to think that
no, of course,
the team at the WBO doesn't hear those concerns. I've seen people say, not many people, but I've seen at least one or two people say that they think the reason the ranking system hasn't changed is because Kay wants to be at the top forever, which I'm sure Kay, and would know that he would never do something like that. It's difficult to find solutions when the site is built on this kind of outdated framework. And forums in general are kind of an outmoded form of communication. I think opening the Discord for a World Beyblade organization was
very good
inevitable thing. Yeah, it was definitely a good idea, but also something we just had to do. Had to acknowledge that conversations on the internet happen in a very different way now compared to when the World Beyblade organization was created. Look forward to updates in the future, but also understand we're dealing with a pretty massive challenge with the infrastructure that the site is built on right now. But I do hope,
I definitely can understand, because you basically have to find someone who knows how the code works, and then after kind of knows exactly how you want to do it. And it's not an easy thing, because you also have to see how you want it. But I always joke with Dan, because every time the eventer in the display, or if you try to click on view all events, it'll be like May 7th, April 27th. There's like no day organization anymore, or like sorting, and like it's kind of like it's bleeding out very slowly. But I'm sure if anyone's listening, they'll look forward to eventually change it. And it's not easy too, because you have to find people who are willing to help. But also it's not cheap either, by the way, to find people who are willing to do it. But no, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I want to also thank you too as well for the WBO, obviously. I guess off the chain then WBO, and obviously also the whole community to be able to make it possible.
Yes, and thank you, and to all the other organizers and community members out there that have made it possible for the World Beyblade organization to continue for so long. Really appreciate it, and I'm glad I could contribute in some small way to that.
Alrighty, that's going to be it for now. So thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day, and bye.